Another presentation before we get to our lunch break for the day today, which means we've got to have something fantastic lined up because they are right in front of lunch and there's no pressure at all. But I'm going to ask Andrew and Patrick to come up on the proverbial digital stage. I see Andrew and I see Patrick. Hey guys, how you both doing today?
Good, thank you.
Awesome. Great to have you both here. Thank you. Today we're going to be talking, or I should say you are going to be talking about ransomware whack-a-mole. And I got to say, for everyone here who's following the latest events, these guys are going to be talking about the takedown and reemergence of LockBit's ransomware as a service platform. Everyone, this is the personification of whack-a-mole are these ransomware threat actors. So this is going to be, no pressure, guys, a fantastic presentation. But Andrew and Patrick, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for being here. The stage is all yours, guys. Again, take it away.
Great. Well, thanks for hosting us today, Sands. And with me is Patrick. He's our threat researcher guy. He's going to do the deep dive into all the technicalities of the malware and the analysis that we produce. And I'm going to give a quick setup for him. So with that, we'll dive right in. So LockBit 3, or the LockBit Ransomware as a Service operation, launched in late 2019 and has been targeting very high-profile organizations worldwide, including critical infrastructure, healthcare, financial data, and so on. So since the release of LockBit 1.0, LockBit is said to be the most prolific ransomware variant in the world and continues to be the most deployed ransomware in 2023. So in June of 2022, LockBit 3, also known as LockBit Black, launched with increasing encryption speed and anti-evasion techniques, making it harder to detect and block. So LockBit 3 shares some similar features and capabilities with Black Matter and Black Cat. And they added features to hamper investigations, including sort of log deletion, emptying of the recycle bin so you couldn't recover files, and also a third level of extortion in the form of DDoS attacks. So, you have first level extortion being data exfiltration with threats to expose or sell the data. Second level is endpoint encryption with ransom note. And the third being the DDoS attack to the infrastructure if you don't pay the ransom. So pretty sophisticated. So LockBit 3 is typically deployed from what we've seen using Cobalt Strike. And we've also seen the use of a few malware loaders from some affiliates. It's also another ransomware family that offers AES as well as CharChar20. So CharChar20 is a 20-round stream cipher and one of the fastest 256-bit stream ciphers available today. Really, it's sort of speed over data integrity, so perfect for ransomware. So there's been a large number of actually quite noteworthy attacks, ransomware attacks, and data breaches in the healthcare industry over the last 4 or 5 months. We primarily saw Black Cat, Rashida, and LockBit 3, which were 3 of the operations suspected of targeting all these hospitals and other medical-related businesses. So one such incident was in December of 2023 when an affiliate violated the rules of the platform operator. Apparently they have rules and ethics. And hacked the hospital for sick children in Toronto, Canada. And, all these poor kids, it's sort of cancer patients, and it really threw a spanner in the works for their medical needs. So the LockBit operation was run more like a business than a gang. And they had to follow these rules or be removed from the platform. So when the platform operator found out that they'd hacked this children's hospital, he sent an apology and also the decryptor for free, while at the same time banning those affiliates from the platform. But luckily, no ransomware was paid. There were a few minor delays in sort of lab work and imaging results in addition to payroll. This is actually really a success story of anything after an attack. But the IT team did a great job in recovering from the incident with critical systems back up after 2 or 3 weeks. So hats off to the IT team on this one, but it should never really have happened in the first place. So there's another incident involving United Healthcare where Black Cat was used, and they paid a $22 million Bitcoin ransom. And the platform operator claimed the FBI had shut down his servers, and then he ran off with the affiliate's crypto wallet, taking all the 22 million ransom. And that really, unfortunately, left the affiliates with no access to the decryption keys, which really put the the kibosh on the recovery for the victim. But I really guess there's no honor amongst thieves. And that little incident cost United Health $782 million. Staggering. So Operation Kronos was, I think it was around about mid-February 2024. Threat actors everywhere saw the coordinated takedown of LockBit, which was announced by Europol and the FBI. So law enforcement agencies from about 10 different countries worked together to disrupt the LockBit ransomware operation, which was run by this Russian threat actor known as LockBit Sub. So the team of Operation Kronos actually breached the infrastructure using a PHP exploit. And they ended up seizing 34 servers along with about 200 LockBit affiliated crypto wallets. The ransoms paid to the LockBit operation over the last 3 years have totaled something over 120 million. It's kind of staggering. And there was over more than 2,000 victims. Now with the site seized, including the source code, the details of the victims and the amounts extorted, the chat logs, so on, and decryptors, many assumed that that would be the death of the operation, but unfortunately they didn't take the whole infrastructure down. So not so fast. Within 5 days, these guys were back up and running. They'd moved its data leak site to a new .onion address, and then announced that LockBit was resuming operations. So activity after the law enforcement takedown has diminished, but some affiliates are operating again. So there is this ability for them to re-energize themselves even after a takedown. But it does appear that many in the cybercrime community believe LockBit will shut down permanently because of the complete loss of trust from the platform. So phishing, right? 94% of all successful breaches are due to phishing, and there are all these great tools out there. So it's the most successful method to initiate an attack. With the increase of sophisticated social engineering toolkits such as BlackEye, NPhisher, and ZPhisher, these bad threat actors can set up and tear down convincing fake websites extremely quickly, right? They provide a number of pre-configured templates, and they're all very well made. And the toolkits provided make it very difficult to identify these websites that they set up. And so remember, it only takes one wrong click on a phishing email to potentially bring down the company to its knees, especially if the final payload is ransomware. One of the things that we've been seeing a lot of success in is user-reported phishing. After decades of maturity, right, phishing solutions, phishing detection solutions, whether perimeter or endpoint, are still allowing malicious emails to infiltrate the network. Depending on the size of the organization, perimeter-based phishing solutions can handle hundreds of thousands of emails every day. So it's like, well, do they work? Yes, they do. They do a very good job. They're very effective at addressing the 96 to 99% of threats thrown at them, but it's that .x% that manages to get through that causes all the damage. Different classifiers get different results. So perhaps the most accurate being 99.68%. With less accurate classifiers, anywhere between 96 to 99%. The more emails your organization sends and receives, the greater the exponential risk. And that's why you need end user education and a separate third-party evaluation or solution to be able to identify those threats. So other than manual analysis, the only way to detect a previously unknown phishing email and payload is to detonate that link in a sandbox environment to extract the IOCs. With malware loaders like Bumblebee and Smoke Loader, they can be configured to run anti-sandbox evasion checks. Now, these checks to look into the detonation environment to see whether they're being monitored. And if these checks fail, the malware hibernates and acts benign, making the analysis making the analyst have to manually analyze it, which is adding another couple of hours to his day. But you can fool the malware by hardening and patching and making the environment as realistic as possible. And that's something that we do at VMRay very well. And so, yes, you know, the analysis of phishing emails is time and resource intensive. We understand that, but it doesn't have to be. Bringing the human element adds to the overall detection fabric and decreases the risk to the organization. So you've got all your employees actually adding to that detection capability. It may increase the number of false reports initially, but if the process is all automated, it's better to be overcautious than under attack. Now, a good thing about phishing simulators such as SoSafe is they really do a good job of training the end users to spot malicious emails. And it's typically the same 20% of people in that company clicking on those links, and the phishing simulators can give you a heads up onto whether further end user education is needed. So VMRay's user-reported phishing sort of adds to that education, and it's one feature we'd like to mention because it's different from other solutions out there. Other solutions typically just forward the email to an abused mailbox, wait for a SOC team leader to go manually analyze them. VMRay's can automate the analysis and also inform the SOC and end user that it was malicious. And the SOC team can take that analysis and use the IOCs to mitigate the threat with email policy rules, firewall rules, and so on. And of course, we can fully automate that process of analysis and response by integrating with all the major EDR and source solutions, such as SentinelOne, Microsoft Defender, CrowdStrike, and so on. And that's it from me. I'll hand it over to Patrick for the detailed analysis.
All right, thank you. So now let's take a look into the stages that we see in a ransomware attack. And I guess you're all familiar with that, right? There are a lot of different stages being involved on one side of the attackers and then also on the defender side. And important is just to understand all of these different stages, because that helps us to build proper lines of defense. It builds us specific points where we can integrate our security solutions, where we can integrate the best-in-class tools to catch off these specific attacks. And as Jamie and Matt also mentioned previously in the short Q&A before, it's very important to capture, or like there's a lot of room where it can capture the lateral movement in an organization, right? You just need to have the proper tools, the proper integration for that. So when we look into the attacker's view, right, there are a lot of different steps. They start with doing maybe some information gathering, trying to build some sort of ideas, how can they deliver the actual payloads into an organization. Maybe they are using exploitations and known vulnerabilities, or just a simple click and run by relying on the user before they finally kick off their exfiltration and data encryption. And in all of these different stages, as we see here, we have on one side the emails, right? End users, regular employees of a company are usually the first point of contact that will receive this sort of malicious emails. They might have embedded URLs, they might have attachments, right? So we need some sort of solutions where we can start off trying to detect this attack as early as possible to prevent further breaks. We need some sort of web filtering mechanisms, right? We need to analyze URLs, we need to analyze attachments, we need to analyze files that are being located at an end system, right? We need virus systems, antivirus systems, EDRs, and so on. And of course, we need a sandbox to have this full picture and a proper analysis of all of these files. A lot of people can say the sandbox might be the last line of defense, but in theory, and actually also in practice, you can start integrating a sandbox into a lot of different stages. As Andrew already mentioned before, you can have an email, you can have an abuse mailbox, you can have some automation, you can even rely on user-reported phishings just to detonate files into a sandbox, ensuring you have a proper analysis and can catch malicious files, bad files as early as possible to even prevent threat actors from reaching the point where they can start with lateral movement at all. When we talk about the attack chains on how threat actors usually, especially ransomware group, usually attack environments, we like to classify this or group this into 3 different categories. On one side, we have the generic cybercrime, which is usually very low complexity, less effort, very simple and basic attacks, where they're just aiming for trying to infect as many systems as possible. That's quite easy and also easy to achieve with a lot of open source tools that are being available. And this is usually done by trying to send out mass spam emails to a lot of different email addresses, a lot of different organizations, with the goal that anyone just clicks on these files. Even though this is quite unusual for ransomware gangs, it just recently happened, and we will dive a bit deeper into one of these examples in just a couple of minutes. And due to the simplicity of these attacks, they always just like to use very basic file types, Office documents, and PDFs, so no complexity at all. The other group what we often see is actually going close to APTs. We call them near APTs. Here we see a bit more effort that they're trying to put into to make the attacks maybe more successful and a bit more targeted in the end. So instead of trying to start from the ground, these groups are often trying to use initial access brokers where they can just buy the access to specific environments. So they don't care about how we can get in there. They just care about, well, we want to be in there and try to execute our payloads. This is oftentimes being used by specific ransomware gangs. They just go into this post-attack in the end, abusing remote management and monitoring software like well-known AnyDesk or TeamViewer. So maybe also some unpatched software vulnerabilities, or even going into RDP and SMB exploits. So there's already more investment that they're trying to use to make this attack successful. And the final group that we see here is actually the targeted attacks, which is most likely being done by state-sponsored APTs. So this is likely targeting high-profile environments like healthcare and so on and so forth, governments, right? And these guys are really doing their homework, which just means that they are preparing for this attack. They are doing a lot of information gathering. They're trying to understand their target. Yeah? We often see attacks where they really already hijack email threads to try to act as legitimate as possible with the high risk that people and employees are just clicking on specific stuff. And also what was covered before is the lateral movement part, and especially for the state-sponsored high-profile attacks, this is very common. So they try to get initial access, and they just pause and going into silent mode whenever they have established a backdoor. Then there's nothing happening. And after some weeks, or maybe even months, they start with lateral movement, doing some information gathering, starting with data collection and exfiltration before they finally just deploy the ransomware. And the high risks and the very bad things about these attacks is that this can often take months. Yeah? So the attacker can be already for some months in your environment without you noticing nothing, right? And this is the most dangerous thing about this. And that's also the reason why we need to start catching these attacks as early as possible to even prevent threat actors from being in your environment and looking through the environment in the end. Now, let's dive into the practical part here. And this is a video that we pre-recorded because in the end, there are so many things that could go wrong in doing live demonstration. I hope this video starts automatically playing. Yes, it does. Thank you. So what we're looking here is a VMRay analysis report from a malicious email, or at least just starting with an email that we have observed a couple of weeks ago. This is related to LockBit operations. And I have mentioned before that it's quite unusual for ransomware gangs to go with mass emails, just trying to get as much as infections as possible. And this is what we can see here. Even though it's unusual, they maybe just went with this approach because of their takedown. Maybe they are running out of money and maybe they are just needing more money. That's the reason why they're going with this approach. So when we look here into this email, we see this is an overview of a VMRay platform report here. We see this malicious verdict. And we provide this user-reported phishing integration. So there is an Outlook plugin where a user, which is the first point of contact for these emails, just receives this in their inbox. And then they just can press a simple button in Outlook saying, well, please detonate this email into VMRay Sandbox. And just within a couple of minutes, we're returning a result, whether this email is good to be used or if it's malicious. In this case, we already see it's a bad email, and we definitely need to take a closer look into this one. As I've mentioned previously, for email, it's very common that they are trying to use either attachments or embedded URLs. So for security solutions, it's very important to not only look into the email, but also recursively look into each URL and look into each attachment, because any of this, in theory, can cause malicious behaviors. Here we see there is an attachment which is called document.zip, and it's an archive, which is per se, I think, nothing malicious, right? There are often being archives sent through emails. So we definitely need to take a closer look into this here. And within this static analysis, we see here, at least for now, only an antivirus system, which is a third-party integration triggered. But stay tuned. There is more that we can discover here within this analysis. Following this archive, which is recursively submitted by VMRay platform anyways, we can see here, again, it's just a static analysis of this file that has been attached to an email. It's malicious again, mainly based on antivirus matches here. But the most important thing is, of course, archives do contain files. That's what they are supposed to do, right? So we need to take a closer look, and we see here there's another embedded file, in this case, which is called document.doc.scr. For a lot of people, when they say, oh, it's document.doc, this might be a legitimate file. But if you have awareness, if you're being trained, if you're being given a professional, this should already raise somehow your alarms, because this is definitely not looking great. It seems to be a file that's trying to be maybe masquerading an Office document because of its name and the file extension. But if you take a closer look, it's also using the SCR extension, which in fact just stands for a Windows screensaver file, and that's an executable. We definitely want to take a closer look here, and VMRay platform also provides an automated recursive submission for this file. And now we finally reach the state where we're going into the dynamic analysis, which just means that we take this file, we detonate this file into a properly secured analysis environment and just execute it. So we just let it run. And during this execution, we are going ahead, and from the outside, we are trying to monitor and capture all of the behaviors that this file might cause during execution. And now just imagine, if you would go ahead and say, we don't use security solutions, we maybe just don't care about this because we have AVs and so on and so forth, and this file gets not catched, then this is exactly the behavior that you would also see in your environment if a user would click on this file. So we provide this safe and secure environment where we can get a quick overview of what this is about. In this case, we already see it's classified as a wiper and a ransomware, and as a threat name, we have the association with LockBit. So now we draw this sort of line and the connection. We have this email, which is a mass spam, and it seems to distribute a LockBit ransomware sample. Of course, we want to understand more what is happening here. So let's take a look here into the VMRay threat identifiers. We call them in short just VTIs, and also developed by VMRay and used to accurately evaluate and score behavior that we can cause, that we can report and catch during the dynamic execution of the sample. Additionally, in this report, we see here some screenshots that have been taken throughout the analysis and a very brief and short summary of the processes that have been created during the execution. And I'm sure it's very important for a lot of people here in the call. We also provide a matrix, a mapping to the MITRE ATT&CK matrix here, which means that in fact, the behavior that we detect during dynamic execution that the sample causes, we will ensure that our VTIs are mapping to the MITRE ATT&CK, that we also understand and get a very, very quick overview just by looking here into this matrix in the end. In this case, for example, I like looking into the defense evasion column. We see that the sample seems to try disabling security tools, which of course, in fact, a legitimate software should not do, right? So you can already have an understanding what is happening here. In addition, on this impact column, we see a lot of alerting things, right? Service stopping, the attempt of stopping services. And of course, the data encryption for impact. And I think just within a couple of minutes, or even maybe just seconds, while looking into this report, we get already an understanding what this sample is doing and which impact it would have in your environment. All of this information, we just provide in a couple of minutes. In this case, it's an analysis time for 4 minutes, where you can see all of this behavior. And this is even already an extended timeout. Usually it's set to 2 minutes, where you have already enough information to either decide whether this is malicious or not. But we want to know more about this LockBit sample. So just taking a brief look what is happening here. We see a Yara match that identifies this file as LockBit, but via a unique way. VMRay records function strings. So whenever you have obfuscated strings, you have a lot of obfuscation in your file. At a specific point when a sample during execution calls APIs from Windows, for example, the arguments that it passes to it needs to be decrypted. They need to be, at least if possible, readable, right? And we just capture these readable arguments to get more information on what is happening there. We see here another very usual behavior for ransomware. In this case, we see that a lot of files are getting renamed by just extending an extension, right? It's this TE8 and so on and so forth. So this is likely the extension that is used by the ransomware. As we've seen before, it tries to disable antivirus software. In this case, I think it's Microsoft Defender. As Andrew also mentioned before, a lot of these files, maybe not ransomware, but at least the loaders that are going prior, that they use prior to this ransomware execution, are trying to be detecting this analysis environment. They're trying to be hidden, right? So we see here the attempt to hide a threat from the analysis environment. And then we also have a very typical behavior that we see in ransomware is they are dropping a ransom node. The user that they're trying to attack and infect, they need to be aware that there's something bad happened. There was an impact to their system. So in this case, we see 705 times the same file being dropped into just different locations. And my favorite here that we see, they want to make it very obvious that something bad happened. So LockBit also is one of the ransomware families that are adjusting the screenshot of your system. If you know what it looks like, we have the screenshot recorded, of course, during the execution. And here you get already the most obvious confirmation that something bad happened because the screen changed. They're saying LockBit black, and all your important files are being stolen and encrypted, which in fact, in this case, is not fully true. We haven't observed any data exfiltration with this analysis or with this sample. So they even maybe make it worse whenever they just say we have also stolen your files and not just encrypted them. So within a couple of minutes or seconds, we understand this overall behavior. We know what happened. But if you really want to dive deeper, which is likely possible and required, if you have already an incident, if you do need to do incident investigation afterwards, because you want to know what is happening, you want to try to rebuild and try to build your detection environment and improve it, of course, then we provide all of this information as well in a way more detailed version. So here we see a list of processes that's being executed. And now let's jump directly to the one that is responsible for doing the actual encryption on the files. Here's once more this VMRay function strings that we've extracted with a Yara match to identify the sample, but we want to focus here on the file operations. So within, remember, just 4 minutes of execution, we recorded nearly 12,000 operations on files. Well, this is likely for ransomware. And if we try to think how ransomware works, of course, they need to look through all of the files. They need to iterate files. Which ones are the ones that they want to encrypt? Then, of course, they need to open these files. They need to read the content out of these files. And of course, they also need to somewhere drop this ransomware node across the system that the user is actually aware on what is happening. When they have read the content of the original files, then of course they will encrypt it in the background. And at a specific point, they also need to write it back, right? It's kind of obvious. And then they just delete and remove the original files. And all of this, what we're seeing here, is most likely related to Windows API calls. So VMRay provides a very detailed tracking of Windows APIs that are being called to ensure we capture all of this behavior and all of the important information. In this case, this is a very brief look into the so-called function log, where we see in this case, they are calling the anti-set information thread API with some arguments that are just being used to hide this thread from a debugger. And this, of course, is also happening for all of the other API calls, ensuring that we capture all of this important behavior and we can drive the correct behavioral report and also the correct detection. And finally, one of the most important things here is, of course, we also provide the IOCs. So during the analysis and during this execution, we can collect a lot of IOCs throughout this report. And the IOCs are very important. And it's especially important to have high quality IOCs because those are the artifacts that you can use to enrich your detection to ensure you cover everything that might be related to the specific sample, or if you want to analyze others as well, and just enrich your environment and the data that you already have, right? VMRay provides a lot of IOCs and a lot of artifacts for different types. In this case, we have files, we have file names, which is hashes, the ransomware extension, of course, registry operation, process operation, and if available, of course, also network operation. So you can use this process image names, you can use command line arguments, you can use this process graph to understand which processes are being spawned by which other processes, and so on and so forth, to just build additional detection rules for EDR systems, for example, to enrich your detection capabilities. Well, now, finally, let's go into the most important takeaways and go into actually these points that we would like to share with you today. I've just recently came across an interview, I think it was, where someone just said, if you're being able to stop the loader you will be able to stop the ransomware as well. And that totally makes sense, right? So to make this a bit more generic, we would even say the earlier you can catch an attack, the earlier you can catch malicious files, the less impact you will see in your environment. And this is the important message where we believe that integrating a lot of different best-in-class security tools, security solutions, collecting them, making them communicating with each other, right? Integrating your sandboxes. So really that you have this big picture of what is happening is really the most important step that can really prevent a lot of attacks that are happening. So there are different levels, right? We have email, there is the network level, there is a host level, right? Where different tools may be better than others, but I think each single tool just doesn't provide that much of value. We really need to connect these tools together. And of course, if you use a sandbox in the background, which each of these tools can detonate files to get the most valuable information out of this, you can have faster IOC generation with this automation, which in fact you can then just use to enable you creating rules and policies for your detection engineering. Considering you're running EDRs, right? You can just take all of this information that, or if you're running EDRs or SIEMs, you can take all of this information, you can feed this into the systems and trying to catch threats as early as possible. And of course, not to forget here that taking all of this information on one side assists you in threat hunting efforts. So if you really want to be very proactive, you're trying to collect as many files as you can, you just analyze these files. Collecting all of these IOCs, this can help you to ensure that attacks are catched as early as possible because you know all of the IOCs. You know what you need to look for. And this is also very important. And finally, not only if you're doing incident response, if you also want to do forensics and so on and so forth, it's often also important for organizations just to understand the TDPs for threat modeling, right? And taking all of this data, collecting this together and trying to get this big picture is something that is really valuable and also something where VMRay platform with the analysis can help you a lot. With that being said, we anyways also have running out of time, so we just have a couple of minutes left for questions. If there are any questions, then of course we are happy to take them.
There actually is a question, Patrick. How successful was the LockBit takedown, and to what extent are you seeing the group reconstitute? If their talent leaves, to which group or groups will they likely go? And given the whack-a-mole nature of takedowns that you mentioned, can ransomware takedown operations truly ever be successful?
That's actually a large question, but also a good one, I would say, right? So maybe starting off with the effectiveness of the takedowns. I think, and this also was discussed before already by Jamie and Matt anyways, right? So if you consider you having a takedown and if the takedown would be actually successful, then I think it's a great hit, right? It's a great attack against these ransomware groups. But on the other side, as we see with LockBit here, they are reappearing just after a couple of days, which of course somehow, as Andrew mentioned, loses the trust in this law enforcement, right? So whenever they're being prepared for some stuff, then I think this is definitely a worst case. And I think threat actors are also smart, right? So like usual organizations will do, you will have backups. You will run your backup strategy, even, for example, a full disaster recovery. And I'm quite sure that a lot of these ransomware groups might start doing the same if they see law enforcement are trying to take their infrastructure down. I guess they might also have some backups running in the end that they can just restart the operation, which makes it even more worse, right? And on the other side, I think the problem that we have seen, and Matt mentioned this before, is that whenever you say they are exfiltrating data prior to the encryption, so they are owning this data already. And if they start moving this data, which we have also seen into this Onion, into Tor network, into Onion URLs, right? Or maybe even into torrents, this data is spread so fast throughout the internet that a lot of people have access to it, right? So it's just not gonna stop you, right? The data is already there, so you are definitely being breached, right? So I think the most important message that I will get out of here is that the safest thing is really to catch this ransomware attack as early as possible, because this is the only way you ensure your environment is safe. And there was absolutely no chance for a threat actor to exfiltrate your data. I hope that answers, or at least it partially answers this very large question.
I would say it does. That said, we're right at time as well. Andrew and Patrick, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you both being on here. Awesome overview. Great content. And I got to say, as someone who continually watches these things get taken down, pop back up, taken down, pop back up, some threat actor borrows and takes over a thing, and then they become this and they assume a name. It's just sometimes too much to keep track of. But nonetheless, great to have you both here. Thank you so much, guys, for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.